I'll take all of Dad's inheritance.
After a sudden accident took my beloved husband, I was left with just myself and my stepson. During his funeral, when I was completely exhausted, my stepson said something I never expected. I had always put his happiness first, thinking of him since he lost his mom at a young age. It seems none of that mattered to him.
You're not my family, so you're gonna have to leave this house. You see that shed next door? You can live there. It costs money to destroy the shed, and it's old, and it's just right for someone like you.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That old shed was falling apart, with gaps letting in the wind. It was obvious no one could live there. He had said countless cruel things to me before, and I never once felt accepted as a mother. But this was just inhumane. Yet, I had nowhere else to go. What could I do? So I was kicked out and had to start living in that decaying shed. But little did I know, this shed would change both mine and my stepson's lives forever. Thank you again, Steve, I said as I took my husband's hand and got out of the car.
Don't worry about it.
Steve smiled. It was a scene I had grown used to. My name is Sarah. I'm a 64-year-old housewife. The man standing next to me is my husband, Steve. It's been over 30 years since we got married. We met at work. He was my boss, and I was his junior coworker. As a supervisor struggling with managing my team, I often turned to Steve for advice. We started meeting outside of work and eventually began dating. I was already in my 30s and had given up on the idea of marriage before meeting him. But I began to feel that I wanted to be with this kind, supportive man. Steve was actually divorced. When we met, he had an 8-year-old son, Mike, and was raising him alone. If I said I wasn't worried about it, I'd be lying. But being able to become a mother was a joy, especially since I was nearing the end of my childbearing years. Most of all, I believed I could overcome anything as long as I was with Steve. I was certain of it. And so, we celebrated our first anniversary together with these feelings in my heart. In a lovely restaurant with a view of the night skyline, Steve proposed to me.
I might not be able to give you a luxurious life, but I promise I'll make you happy.
He gave a wry smile. I couldn't be happier. I accepted his proposal without a second thought. And so we got married. However, we didn't have a wedding ceremony or go on a honeymoon. His son, Mike, was still in elementary school, and we thought it might be a bit cruel for a boy who had lost his mom. We both agreed on this decision, so there were no regrets. Having breakfast together as a family and occasionally going out on weekends. Those simple days spent together were more precious to me than anything. Then, when Steve reached retirement age, we decided to move to his hometown. The houses, passed down through generations, was old but very grand. And on the property, there was a large shed. It was dim inside, even during the day, and had a somewhat eerie feeling, so I rarely went in. But Steve always said repeatedly,
This shed is important.
At Steve's suggestion, we used it as a storage space for family keepsakes. I'm home, I said as I opened the front door. The old door creaked loudly.
Silence.
Noticing the sound, Mike, who was in the hallway, glanced over for a moment. Mike was supposed to come home today, and it seemed he had arrived earlier than planned. Oh, Mike, welcome back. You're early. but he ignored my greeting and headed upstairs.
Hey, Mike, you could at least say hi to your mom.
Steve, it's fine. I grabbed Steve's arm to calm him down as he raised his voice to follow. Mike, who was climbing the stairs, glared back at us.
I've told you many times, I've never once thought of her as my mom.
Don't talk like that. Who do you think took care of you all this time?
Dad, did you have to take her on another useless hospital visit?
Mike, there are things you can and can't say.
At Steve's words, Mike let out a deep sigh and stormed off.
I'm sorry, Sarah. Please don't pay attention to what he says.
It's all right, thank you. Steve looked at me with an apologetic face. Mike had always been like this with me. According to Steve, he had been quite the mama's boy since he was little, and losing his mom must have been a tremendous shock for him. Since then, it's like he's become a completely different person, turning cold and distant. Maybe that's why he's never accepted me as his mom, never speaking to me since he was a child. I know my hospital visits are a burden on you.
Don't worry about it. I'm doing this because I want to. Here.
Steve extended his hand. I took his hand and stepped up into the house. I can't move my legs well. When I was younger, one hospital visit and some rehab once a year were enough. But after I turned 40, my condition worsened. Now, I go to the hospital several times a week, and with Steve's support, I manage to get by. Living alone would be almost impossible, both financially and physically. Mike must have been frustrated seeing my condition get worse and worse.
You're in the way.
He would push me aside when I went to the bathroom or deliberately hide my walking cane. As he grew older, his harassment toward me increased. Mike really loved his mom, didn't he?
Yeah, he used to be such a kind boy who cared about his family. I just wish he'd be more manageable on the rare occasions when he comes home.
Steve, don't worry. I'm just happy to be living with family. I wasn't just pretending to be strong. I truly felt that way. I was happy just to be with my family, to be with Steve. One rainy day, the sky was covered with large black clouds. Looks like the rain won't stop for a while. I wondered if Steve took an umbrella with him. With that on my mind, I went about my usual cleaning routine. At that moment, suddenly, the phone rang loudly. I have a bad feeling about this. I hesitantly picked up the receiver and put it to my ear. Hello.
Hello, this is the Central District Fire Department.
The fire department? Did something happen to my husband? My heart started pounding faster and faster. All the sounds around me faded away, and I felt utterly alone.
A car skidded on the wet road and collided with your husband's car.
Is my husband all right? Terrible thoughts flashed through my mind. I desperately tried to push those images away and waited for the firefighter's words.
The car was severely damaged, and it appears that your husband has sustained serious injuries.
No way.
Your husband is being rushed to the hospital. Would it be possible for you to come to the hospital?
Yes, I understand. I'll be there right away. After confirming the call had ended, I immediately called the taxi company. I had kept their number handy so I could get to the hospital quickly, even if my husband wasn't around. Thankfully, a taxi arrived quickly. I held back my emotions, got in the taxi, and headed to the hospital. As soon as I arrived at the hospital, the nurses rushed toward me. "Are you his wife? This way to his room." I hurried to Steve's room, following their directions. When I opened the door, there was Steve, lying in a condition I couldn't recognize. He was hooked up to an IV and an oxygen mask, his body covered in wounds, blood seeping out.
Are you his wife?
Yes.
Please stay calm. He sustained a severe head injury and there was bleeding in his brain.
No.
There's nothing more we can do. I know this is difficult, but please contact the other family members.
It felt like something happening on TV. It didn't seem real. No, maybe I just didn't want to believe it. With trembling hands, I called Mike and other relatives to explain what had happened. Right after making those calls,
Sarah, are you there?
Steve, who was not expected to regain consciousness, called out to me. I rushed to his side and held his hand. It wasn't like the hand he always extended to me. It was weak, almost lifeless. I brought my face closer, not wanting to miss his faint voice.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
"It's okay, don't apologize." He gave a wry smile, just like when he had proposed to me. It was the same smile he always had, and tears began to fall.
I was happy being with you. Thank you.
"Me too, thank you." As I answered, Steve smiled with relief and closed his eyes. I knew this would be our last conversation. Shortly after, his heartbeat stopped and Steve was gone. Everything that followed happened so quickly. People came in turns, asking me to fill out various forms. There was so much to do that even though I had seen Steve pass away right before my eyes, I couldn't grasp the reality that he was gone. After all the formalities were finally settled, I waited for the taxi in the hospital lobby. Just then, my phone rang. It was a call from Mike. "Mike, what's going on?" I answered the phone, wondering. I had just called him right after Steve's passing, so it was strange that he was calling again so soon. "Hello, Mike?"
So, about Dad's estate.
Mike spoke in a calm and flat tone. I couldn't respond right away to the unexpected topic. "Estate? What do you mean?"
Just like I said, we need to discuss what to do with Dad's estate.
"Steve just passed away. Do we really need to rush into this?" Honestly, I hadn't had the time to think that far ahead. I'd like to wait until after the funeral to talk about it. What he said next took me by surprise.
As always, you're useless and just in the way.
"No way."
Well, whatever. I'll handle everything.
"Huh? What do you mean by everything?"
Estate distribution. You're not my family, so don't interfere. Just wanted to let you know.
"Wait, Mike?" He hung up without giving me a chance to respond. I stood there, unable to process what had just happened. I remained in the hospital lobby, frozen, until the taxi driver finally called out to me. Afterward, we managed to complete his funeral, and all the relatives gathered at the house where Steve had lived. Steve, being one of the older family members, seemed to have been well liked by many. Many people expressed their gratitude to him.
By the way, what will you do with this house? It must be lonely and too big for you to live alone, Sarah.
Well, that's. When asked about the inheritance, I hesitated to answer. Mike said he'd handle everything, but what did he mean by that? Of course, I couldn't tell the relatives that, so I tried to dodge the topic. Apparently hearing the conversation, Mike joined in.
I'll inherit this house.
What?
As the eldest son, it seems right for me to take it over. We talked about it together.
He said this with an odd smile. Maybe I was the only one who found it unnatural.
Oh, I see.
The relatives nodded in agreement. There was no discussion, nothing. But there was no point in arguing about it now. Trying to keep my suspicion off my face and go along with the conversation, even more unbelievable words came out.
Sarah is going to live in the shed that Dad cherished.
The shed. I never agreed to that. I had rarely gone into that large shed. The roof was peeling off, and the inside was falling apart, barely holding its shape. It was a very old building and looked like a ruin from afar. Mike kept pushing the conversation forward. When the relative stepped out for a moment, I confronted Mike. Wait, what do you mean by living in the shed? And we haven't even discussed his inheritance.
I told you on the phone. I'll handle everything.
That's not what I meant.
Anyway, once this gathering is over, get out of the house. I'm going to live here.
The moment the relatives left, Mike's demeanor changed completely. His hatred for me was clear in his expressions and words.
Oh, and as for the other assets, I'll inherit almost everything, so just go along with it from now on.
Silence.
I'll give you that shed, though. You can have it.
Why?
That shed is pretty old, you know? It's going to cost $50,000 to demolish it. It's really in the way.
So you're giving it to me?
Yeah, it just hit me. An eyesore belongs in an eyesore.
That shed was something Steve cherished. How can you say that?
Well, it's perfect then. It might be a little old, but it's just right for you, isn't it?
Mike laughed coldly. That shed had indeed been used for storage. It also holds Steve's photos, stuffed animals given to Mike, and many memories of our family. And above all, Steve cherished it dearly. If I handed that shed over to Mike, he'd probably tear it down and get rid of everything inside. I had to stop that at all costs. Suppressing my frustration, I decided to accept Mike's unreasonable proposal. From the next day, I began living in the shed, which was like a ruin. Even during the day, it was dim inside, and on rainy days, it leaked. Moreover, since Mike had taken Steve's savings, I didn't have enough money to live and continue my hospital visits. I searched for jobs nearby that I could manage with my leg condition, and finally found a small role at an elementary school, reading books to the children. If I fixed one thing, another would break. Balancing the endless cleaning and repairs of the shed with my part-time jobs at the school drained my energy. The houses I used to live in was just a stone's throw away from the shed, so I'd often run into Mike. Each time, he'd never help. He'd just sneer and throw cruel words my way.
That place really suits you.
One day, while living that routine, I was cleaning as usual when I noticed something shiny on the floor. I picked it up and brought it close to my face. An old coin. I've never seen anything like this. Curious, I decided to ask the teachers I had met through my part-time job at the elementary school.
It's a very old coin.
As soon as I showed the coin, the history teacher's eyes lit up. Is that so?
Let me look it up. Look,
See this?
The teacher showed me the computer screen. There was a picture of the exact same coin, and it said it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is it really that valuable?
Yes, earthquakes and fires were common in that era, so not many coins have survived. I never thought I'd see such a rare item.
Why would something like that be in the shed?
Well, it's been around for quite some time. Maybe someone in the family quietly kept it hidden. Anyway,
Maybe.
this belongs to you, Sarah. You must have had a tough time after your husband's passing. Please use this to support yourself.
Thank you so much.
Well, this is great news.
The teacher smiled warmly. I couldn't believe it had such value, but honestly, it was a great help to me now. I should take it to town tomorrow. Maybe good things can happen if you keep on living. Thinking that, I went back to the shed and went to bed. The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of someone pounding on the shed door. Who could it be so early in the morning? Rubbing my eyes, I opened the door to find Mike standing there. Mike, what's going on?
Move aside.
He pushed past me, heading deep into the shed, opening boxes left and right. Wait, what are you doing?
Hey, where are you hiding it?
Hiding what?
The old coin. It's worth hundreds of thousands, right? I heard the teachers talking excitedly about it yesterday near the elementary school.
Silence. My faint hope was shattered in an instant. The teachers probably meant well, but I should have asked them to keep it a secret. Then again, they didn't know Mike's true nature, so they probably wouldn't have believed me anyway. It was only a matter of time before he found out.
Dad's inheritance was too small to begin with.
You inherited everything Steve had.
This shed must have more stuff hidden in it, right?
This is bad. Knowing how Mike is, if he doesn't find anything, he might just tear down the shed. I have to stop Steve's precious shed from being destroyed somehow. Okay, these are all the coins I found. I moved them into this box yesterday to take them to town today.
You should have handed them over from the start.
I'll give you the coins. Just please, leave the shed alone.
Geez.
Mike grabbed the box from my hands and walked out. Thinking about how tomorrow would be just another repeat of the same exhausting days made me feel dizzy. But at least the shed was safe. As long as I had those happy memories, I could keep going. I opened the box near my bed and looked at Steve's smiling photo, reassuring myself. Still, the fact remained that I was nearing the limit of how long I could continue this lifestyle as I approached 70. Living in this less than ideal environment was probably worsening my leg condition. The doctor told me to avoid getting too cold, if possible. Sigh. I sighed and looked around the shed. Wind was whistling through the gaps. Come to think of it, Steve always seemed to take special care of this shed. Before we moved in, he didn't visit it all that often.
There's something important stored in this shed.
I suddenly remembered Steve muttering that shortly after we moved in. I wonder what he meant by something important. Considering my legs, maybe it's time I organize this place a bit more. When I first moved into the shed, I had only cleaned up enough space for myself to live in. This shed was larger than I had imagined, and I still hadn't gone through all of it. Wow, look at all these fancy vases just lying around. Mike would probably love to get his hands on these. Deeper inside, there were antiques and pottery that seemed to have some value, though not as much as the coins. Steve never had a habit of collecting things like this, so they probably belonged to the previous generation. I still hadn't found anything that looked like the something important Steve had mentioned.
What are you doing?
Mike, I had left the shed door open while I worked since it was so dusty inside. He must have seen me while passing by.
So, there really is something hidden in this shed.
No, it's just that with my legs, I thought it was time to organize things properly. It wasn't a lie. I had to make him give up. Otherwise, this shed would be torn down before I could find Steve's something important.
Is that really all?
Yes. He stared into my eyes. I stared back, refusing to look away. A long silence followed. Suddenly, Mike grabbed a wooden stick from the floor and started smashing the wall near the entrance. What are you doing?
You were trying to hide something, weren't you?
Please, just don't destroy the shed. I instinctively grabbed Mike's arm. Maybe he hadn't expected me to be this strong, but he stopped and let the stick fall to the floor.
If you don't want Dad's precious shed destroyed, you better think carefully.
He glared at me and then walked out of the shed. I have to find it fast, or this shed will be destroyed. I suppressed my shaking hands as I picked up the broken pieces of the wall. Mike's blows had been so strong that the fragments had scattered far back. They've gone all the way in, and they're stuck. I can't get them out easily. It was dark, and I couldn't see well, but it looked like there was a groove in the floor, and the debris had gotten caught there. All right. I pulled with all my might, and the floor made a loud clunking sound. A square-shaped hatch lifted slightly from the floor. I hesitantly lifted the hatch, revealing a staircase leading down, big enough for a person to pass through. What is this? A hidden staircase? Steve had never mentioned anything like this. I peered down the staircase from above, but it was pitch dark, and I couldn't see anything. However, strangely, I didn't feel any sense of dread. I grabbed the flashlight I kept near my bed and decided to go down the stairs. After descending about 30 steps, I found a small room. It was an odd space with nothing but a table in the center. What was this room used for? As I shone the light and moved closer to the table, I noticed a small cardboard box on top. Normally, I would have been too cautious to open it. But for some reason, at that moment, I felt like I had to open it. I peeled off the tape on the box and gently lifted the lid. Inside was a navy blue ring case and a letter. I opened the ring case, and a large diamond sparkled brightly. A diamond ring? Why is it here? Puzzled, I picked up the letter, and my breath caught. On the envelope was written, "To Sarah." No doubt about it. This was Steve's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened the letter, and this is what it said.
To Sarah, I'm leaving this letter here in case something happens to me. We didn't have a wedding ceremony or go on a trip because we were thinking about Mike, and it's weighed on me all this time. I have always felt guilty for not giving you a ring, taking advantage of your kindness. I'm not brave enough to give it to you directly, so I was planning to give you this ring on our 50th wedding anniversary. Please let it stay here until then. The papers included with this letter are the deed to this shed and an inventory of the estate. This has been passed down through generations, but I have decided that it can't be given to Mike in his current state. If things stay as they are and I suddenly disappear, Mike will probably say cruel things and act unreasonably toward you. When that happens, show this letter to the lawyer. I've arranged for him to handle everything.
Steve, this ring must have been so expensive. Steve's smiling face flashed in my mind. His shyness had never changed, not even until the end. And I loved that about him. Memories of the days we spent together came rushing back, and tears welled up in my eyes. At the end of the letter, there was a phone number. It was probably the lawyer's number. I could hardly believe what was happening, but I gathered my courage and made the call. It connected to a law firm. When I told the woman on the phone my name, she exclaimed, "Oh," and quickly transferred me to a male lawyer. He introduced himself as Ted, a friend of Steve's.
Sarah, I've been expecting your call.
Ted, I just found this letter, and I'm still so confused.
Yes, I understand. Take your time. It's okay.
Ted's gentle voice helped to ease my tension. After a while, I calmed down and explained everything that had happened since Steve's passing until I found the letter. Ted then spoke.
You've been through so much. You've done well to make it this far. Leave the rest to us.
Wait, does that mean hiring you as a lawyer?
Yes, but don't worry about the fees. I owe Steve a lot.
Ted chuckled softly. It was a moment that should have brought me immense relief. However, all I could think about was Mike's face. Excuse me, but could you give me a little more time?
You're concerned about your son, Mike, aren't you?
Yes, even if he doesn't accept me, he's still my precious son. I feel like I might be cornering him. I was surprised at my own words. After all the terrible things he had done to me, why was I hesitating? Is this what being a mother is all about?
I don't usually say this, but from what you've told me, Mike's actions are extremely unfair. However, we'll wait until you're ready, Sarah. I'm sure that's what Steve would want as well.
Thank you. I hung up the phone, put the letter and ring away, and closed the hidden door. Until I could sort out my feelings, Mike couldn't find out about this door. I covered it with as much dirt and dust as possible and moved items over it. A few days after discovering the letter, I returned from my part-time job at the elementary school to find Mike and an unfamiliar man standing in front of the shed. A sense of dread washed over me, and I hurried toward the shed as fast as my bad leg would allow. Mike, what's going on? Who is this?
Oh, it's you. We've decided to tear down the shed after all.
What? Why so suddenly? Mike and the man beside him smirked.
It's all because you've been hiding things, isn't it? I figured there might still be something valuable in this shed, so I talked to Sam, the appraiser here. He agreed to demolish it for free and buy whatever we find in the shed.
But wasn't the shed passed down to me?
That was just a verbal agreement, wasn't it? No proof. Who's gonna believe you?
While I stood there in shock, the two of them went on planning the schedule and demolition process. At this rate, the shed is really in danger. Unable to stand still, I ran over to Sam, who was standing next to Mike, and grabbed his arm. Please, don't destroy this shed.
Whoa! What are you doing? Let go.
Sam shook his arm free with force. The impact threw me off balance, and I couldn't steady myself on my bad leg. I nearly hit my head on the curb. In that instant, I felt as if I was floating for a brief moment before collapsing. The angle shifted slightly, so I only ended up with minor injuries. What was that? Could it have been Steve? I usually don't think that way, but maybe it was because of the letter. I couldn't help but believe it. Not just for my sake, but Mike can't go on like this either. Feeling as though Steve was pushing me forward, I decided to call Ted. From there, things moved quickly.
You don't have to do anything, Sarah.
Just as he said, Ted and his team handled most of the complicated work. In addition to the letter Steve had left, Ted had also been given a legally binding will, so all of Steve's assets were transferred to me.
Stop it. This is my house.
Yelling could be heard from the house. It seemed the workers hired by Ted were trying to evict Mike. Mike noticed me approaching and began hurling insults.
Hey, you. What's going on?
What do you mean? Didn't you get the letter from Ted, the lawyer?
Huh? Who'd read such complicated paperwork?
Fine, I'll keep it simple. We found Steve's will in the shed. All of his assets have been transferred to me.
All his assets? You've got to be kidding me.
The color drained from Mike's face. After Mike was evicted, I went inside the houses to find a pile of overdue notices on the table. There were also horse racing newspapers in the trash, so he must have gotten into gambling and accumulated debt. He was probably planning to sell the house and land to pay off his debts. If he hadn't treated me so terribly, I might never have found the letter in the shed. The inheritance could have been divided fairly, giving him a reasonable amount of money. This was truly a case of reaping what you sow. And now, having been cornered, Mike apparently embezzled from his company and is currently facing legal consequences. No matter how terribly he treated me, he's still my only son. With Ted's support, I visited him frequently. But every time he hurled insults at me.
You're not my mom. With those legs, you're nothing but a burden on society.
Words I had held back for so long nearly escaped my lips. Seeing my distress, Ted, sitting beside me, stood up.
Mike, have you ever thought about why Sarah's legs don't work properly?
Ted,
Shut up. Who cares about that?
Don't you remember? When you were in elementary school, Sarah saved you when you were about to get hit by a motorcycle.
What? Is that true?
Mike looked at me with wide eyes. I made up my mind and spoke. Yes, it's true. You were saved, but I didn't quite make it in time. My legs were run over by the motorcycle. The fractures healed, but it seems my ligaments were damaged, and I was left with permanent effects.
Why didn't you ever tell me something so important?
I didn't want to corner you. Ted also knew about it from Steve and kept it a secret all this time.
Silence.
But to you, I'm just a nuisance. From now on, we won't see each other anymore. When you get out of jail, live however you want. Mike was stunned into silence. Leaving him behind, I walked away from the prison. Several years have passed since then, and thanks to the assets Steve left me, I've been able to live like I used to. Of course, the shed remains just as it was. And on my left hand, the ring sparkles. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mike standing there. His hair and beard were unkempt, and he was wearing a worn-out t-shirt. Strangely, though, the coldness and aggression he once had were gone. What brings you here?
I know it's selfish, but I just had to apologize for what Ted told me about your legs.
It's all right. I did what I did because I wanted to.
When my real mom passed away, I was devastated. I knew you gave me a lot of love, but I just couldn't accept it.
I see.
It's too late now, but I'm sorry.
With that, Mike bowed deeply. I decided to accept his sincere apology. He began visiting often, taking care of me with my bad legs. He has become a kind and warm person, as if he were a different person.
All right, I'll be back next week.
After Mike left, I looked around the now quiet living room. Steve, it took time, but Mike has returned to how he used to be. I spoke to the smiling photo of Steve propped up on the table.